Of all the 40 tracks in Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled, there is one that will always remain the most sacred and iconic in terms of time trials. Crash Cove, the firstborn. At first glance, it might look simple and a very short track, but don't let its looks fool you. Cove would become one of the most frustrating and difficult tracks to optimize. This is not only the story and evolution of its world records. This is also the story of one of the most iconic stops in Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled. June 19, 2019. Boys, girls, and furries of all ages went out to buy the new Crash Team Racing Nitro-Fueled, a long-awaited remake for the franchise, which promised to be Beanock's next masterpiece. A guy in Italy turns on his console, agrees to the terms and conditions, and immediately enters the time trial section. After a few hours, the time that would become the first world record Cove registered in the Crash Team ranking page was uploaded to YouTube. 1 minute, 21 seconds, and 100 of a second was the time that Italian 21 uploaded. A time that would be quickly improved the next day to 1:20:04, and finally to the sub 20 with 1:19:87. The route behind these times was already previously established from the original game, where cornering inside the map was essential, as well as to keep the reserves on for the entirety of the track and the use of any character with a speed engine. Italian's time wasn't bad at all, considering the game was on its first day of release. But let's remember that the remake wasn't only released in Europe. It is time to go to Brazil, home to a speedrunner since 2013. Ladies and gentlemen, the Red Hot. Red Hot is a well-known player in the franchise community, devoting himself to speedruns, glitches, bugs, and more across multiple games in general. Red Hot would get the world record day after Italians with a 1:19:81, highlighting one strategy of his route compared to the Italian. Red Hot jumps from the shortcut directly into the bridge, cutting a little more time without having to worry about the reserve like Italian did. A few hours later, he would drop it to 1:19:01, making use of the U-turn on the second lap to cut the time a bit more. The 1:18 was inevitable. Italian 21 did not sit idly by in the face of the challenge, and the day after Red Hot's success, he achieved a 1:18:94 for his nation. 3 more days passed, and he lowered it even more to 1:18:87. The bridge jump strat had already been added to his inventory, but there was still no indication of U-turning on his runs. This would be the last world record that Italian 21 would achieve, but he would not be the last Italian to hold the title. A week after the game's release, another well-known player in the original CTR community entered the time trial stage. From Tuscany, a region located in Italy, we are talking about none other than Oxide the Best. Oxide tried Cove, and in less than 3 hours, according to his own words, he managed to break the record with a 1:18.71. Days passed, and Oxide got very attached to the track, lowering his time to 1:18.47. For these times, Oxide managed to improve Red Hot's U-turning by generating a drift immediately after the turn. This allowed him to concentrate himself as the world record for more than 10 days. But it was still too early to celebrate. A Brazilian was not still satisfied with his times. Almost a month after the game's release, Red Hot returns. With the new strats learned and with some better lines, he managed to lower the time to 1:18.27. Finally, after a week of daily time trials, he arrived at 1:18.17, in which he stated that he was more than satisfied with his time. However, this record wouldn't last for many hours on his guitar, as Oxide will counter-strike with a 1:18.04, leaving him with less than 2 frames behind the sub. Red Hot didn't want to be left behind, and after 5 days, he tied the match. Comparing both runs, we can say that Oxide had a better first lap and Red Hot a better second one. Many days passed, and there was no news of more records on this track. Community wanted to know the outcome of his confrontations between players, who more than being rivals, worked mutually to achieve the 1:17 together. On August 20, the dispute and the waiting were finally over. Oxide had just accomplished the impossible by then. With only 2 months after the game's release, it seemed that Crash Cove was incredibly close to being over. The established route was the most optimal and the best possible time was separated by only a few hundredths. But this isn't the impossible stuff we talk about in the title. Many of the comments found on Red Hot and Oxide videos were from people either cheering them on, fans who couldn't explain their feats, and others who kept calling them hackers. However, there wasn't a specific user who not only watched but analyzed. This player had been practicing the track almost as long as these 2 pillars of Crash Cove, and had studied video after video every route and strategy of the previous world records. From North America, known for his speedrun from the Insane Trilogy, Edge119. On September 14, 2019, Edge dethroned Oxide with a time of 1:17.87. Making use of the U-turn on the first lap, he had a very good start with a 27.62. His second lap did not reach Oxide's 25.12, perhaps because Edge didn't make the jump after the bridge and thought that drifting was an alternative way to cut time. But it all paid off when in his third lap he got a 25.08, which narrowly missed by getting too close of the edge of the map. Edge would finally get the world record after so much effort and dedication, but the crown would not stay with him for long. As Anton Ego once mentioned,
not everyone can become
world record,
but a
world record
can come from anywhere.
Let's turn off the PlayStation for a moment. It's time to switch consoles. Five days after Edge's masterful run, PES, an Xbox player from Australia who dominated the Insane trilogy, beat Edge's time by 1 frame. His run did not exceed Edge's first lap. However, the 25:02 achieved on his second lap gave him the record and made the American understand that jumping off the bridge was indispensable. His total time, 1:17.84. This record was not broken for a whole month, but let's remember that 3 can play this console war. From the most unexpected console, Moschi, a player from England, manages to get a 1:17.83, 100 less than PES, but thus beating the Australian record. Unfortunately, we do not have access to Moschi's videos nowadays due to him closing his YouTube channel, and it's not possible to analyze the strats he used at the time to optimize this track. PES regained the title a few hours after Moschi uploaded his run. In this run, he got a better first lap and 2 good laps right after, but he didn't break any records on them, which meant the best possible time was still lower. Moschi managed to reach 70/100th first with his 1:17.79. One day after more practice, he hit .76 and decided to give his fingers a break. 1:17.76 was the world record for more than 40 days, but on December 10, 2019, Edge came back to recover his title with a 1:17.74. By then, the times in .70 started to become constant between Moschi and Edge, and thus, as expected, Moschi regained the record only 3 days later. Moschi decided to lower his time to .69.
Nice.
An incredible accomplishment, but one that still didn't quite satisfy him. This was because of the Switch limitations. This made it more difficult to bring out the true potential Moschi had for this track. He then decided to move to PlayStation 4 to push his limits and merely focus on breaking this specific track. Again, and again, and again. But how did Moschi lower the time in Crash Cove so much? It is estimated that, within the first few weeks of the game's release, a technique in this track was discovered. This one allowed the player to get a fire slightly faster than the one after performing 3 drifts in perfect. Edge had known of the technique ever since, but for him, it didn't seem feasible to use it at the time. It was in 2020 when this new strat was reborn in the minds of all racers, and became the standard for the greatest track optimization. There hasn't been a conscious name for the trick, but many people called it the bridge grind tech, where you jumped from the shortcut to the edge of the bridge, floating for a few hundredths of a second, the ones needed to reach the red color on the jump bar. Thanks to this new technique, the times with 17 seconds were much more achievable for most players, and Moschi would use this new method to lower this time even more. He started by lowering it from 69 to 64, 61, 57, 54, 51, 47, 41. 20 days later, he lowered it to 37, and finally to .34. It is unfortunate that all of those runs can no longer be seen today. This great part of the history of Cove records will be remembered as the missing link that only those who lived through the early years of the game could admire. All these times were given in a span of 4 months, but Moschi wasn't the only one who had been optimizing this track. There was someone else in the community, someone whose records were kept a secret from the public, someone whose name had already been mentioned before.
You pesky earth slugs like to race, eh? Well, I, nitrous oxide, am the fastest racer in the galaxy.
Oxide returned to Crash Team ranking with a 1:17.34, tying Moschi's time. But there was more to this video than just the record. This included a message to Moschi, a message that would spark conflict and drama between these two racers. I don't want to bore you out with the whole story, so here's a brief dramatization of the events.
I finally got a 1:17 and 37, I reached my limit so I'll stop playing now.
Hi, I also got a 1:17 and 37.
Oh. Now I feel motivated to play again. I'll lower it to 1:17 and 34.
Hey, you told us that you won't play anymore. You're a clown. Look, I also got a 1:17 and 34, and I am showing it to you even if I normally hide my records.
Oh. Well then. Bye.
You made Moschi to retire. That's bad.
Moschi ended up retiring from the game, deleting each and every one of his videos of his YouTube channel, and leaving Crash Cove in mourning. The 1:17.34 was still there, but who else could get this time apart from Oxide and Moschi himself? Edge? Pez? Red Hot? None of the above. This would be a single Penguin's task. That's right, the same one we saw just a bit ago. This penguin is one of the most recognized players in the Insane trilogy and the community in general. His name? Jordan925, and let me tell you, he was closer than ever. Jordy achieves 1:17.34, generating the most bizarre triple tie of the entire game. A new rivalry was born, but this time it didn't seem as friendly as the other ones before. A week after the tie, Oxide lowered his time to 1:17.30 in an unbelievable run. This record broke records, becoming the longest one of the track. A total amount of 210 days had to pass before Oxide himself lowered it to 1:17.27 and later to 1:17.24. In the last run, Oxide achieved a first lap of 27.39, followed by 2 laps of 24.92. However, the British Penguin had also practiced all this time to bring us a very unexpected Christmas present. Jordy tied the 1:17.24 with a 42 on the first lap that didn't beat Oxide's, but that would be rewarded with an 89 on the third lap. This new tie would only be short-lived, unfortunately for Jordy, since Oxide also came with gifts that same Christmas Eve, giving us a 1:17.21. The Italian had improved his time by 1 frame, getting the same times for the first and third lap, but improving his second and achieving the 89. In this way, Oxide began 2021 with a 1:70.20, a time that seemed the pinnacle of the track. Going down more than that, it was practically impossible. Jordy continued to practice on the track, but he could only reach 1:17.21. The 1:16 would only be dreamed of. But 2021 brought more surprises than we could ever imagine. Eventually, Oxide lowered his time to 1:17:17 at the end of the month, but didn't upload his record on the page. However, a new strategy with a bit of bad reputation was rising on the horizon.
I fear no man, but that thing, it scares me.
For those who don't know, the pulse width or snowball is a technique that involves using the speed gauge with the down, brake, accelerate, and right or left button combination all at the same time. One of the conditions for some tracks in which this technique is applied is the loss of reserves to conserve momentum, and thus gain more speed. This technique was discovered around August 2020, and had initially been used on tracks like Electron Avenue and Ruse Tubes. Nevertheless, it wasn't until February 2021 that the technique would be used as such in Crash Cove. No one had put it to the test then in a run, but that wasn't going to stop a young Bolivian resident. Killer 749 practiced the track for weeks and had a very good knowledge of the aforementioned tech. After getting a first lap of 27:46 and a second lap of 24:95, everything seemed to indicate that Killer wouldn't beat Oxide's time. But he did this on his third lap. Thanks to pulse width, Killer achieves a lap of 24:75, shaving a whopping 20 hundredths off his regular time, and ties the record with his 1:17:17. Due to the use of this technique, Crash Team Ranking decided to include the no major glitches category for the track, and so far 1:17:17 is the current record in that list. Anyway, with this new element to take into consideration, it was time to revive that long-awaited dream that seemed unattainable: the sub 17. This tie lasted a couple of months, but it was a matter of time before Oxide's best lines overshadowed the Bolivian's record. Despite publicly admitting that he didn't like the idea of using this technique for his records, the Italian uses it to get best time so far. He gets a better first lap than Killer, and on lap 3 he manages to pulse it without a problem and gets 24:72 as his best lap. His final time? 1:17:07. With only less than 3 frames of difference for the dream sub, days, weeks, and months pass without anyone being able to make more progress on the track. The goal seemed to fade once more. The community thought they had reached their limit once and for all. But a small ray of hope from the southernmost part of the planet had arrived. It was Martinayo V from Chile, who is coming on a streak of inconceivable world records all over the entire game. If anyone was capable of reaching the sub 17, it had to be him. The community, placing all his trust in a single player, waited for the next great record of the Chilean phenomenon. Thus, Martin began to practice the track seriously, surpassing all the past world records mentioned throughout this video. On September 12, 2021, Martin managed to break Oxide's time with a disturbing 1:17:01. He reached this time by implementing a new strat in the final corner of the track, where he stopped drifting to stick more consistently to the edge of the wall. With this new strategy, he got 1 frame less on the first and second lap. Martin had achieved an outstanding world record. Right? Despite the great milestone that this represented for the track, the victory tasted bittersweet to Martin. He had achieved the world record, but he knew that what the world wanted to see, and above all, what he wanted to achieve, was the long-awaited 116. His determination at this time blinded him to many things, so much so it began to affect his personal life and his health. Due to all this, Martin left the track because he knew that staying to continue practicing would do more damage than good. Martin's world record remained immobile, intact for a long time. The 116 became a myth again. And so it was. For 6 long months. There are no words to describe how huge this achievement is for a player. After having abandoned the track for many months, Martin decided to give it one last chance and finally made the dream 116 a reality. 116.94 is the current record for Crash Cove, being the only existing sub-17 and lasting a total of 140 days by the time of uploading this video. I could say that this is the end of the story, and that thinking of lowering the record will be a crazy and impossible idea, but I think I've learned throughout the realization of this project that impossible is just another word for those who really persist.
Yo, Sota here. I want to give a huge thanks to TELLO for helping me out with his narration for this bit. This one took me a lot of time to get it done. I really hope you all enjoy it. Please consider subscribing and leaving your like if you haven't already. I would really appreciate it. And as always, thanks for watching.